Ambassador Lisa Martinez adjusted her headset for the third time in 10 minutes as she reviewed her notes for the upcoming Galactic Council session. The human embassy ship New Horizon buzzed with constant activity and chatter from her diplomatic team. Communications officer Amy Chen sat at her station nearby, maintaining her usual stream of reports back to Earth while simultaneously coordinating with the ship's crew about meal schedules and duty rotations. Captain Jake Morrison walked on too, the bridge carrying his morning coffee, and immediately began discussing the day's flight plan with his navigation team, his voice mixed with the dozens of other conversations happening throughout the ship's corridors and work areas. The sound of human voices had become as common as the hum of the ship's engines over the past 3 years since first contact with the galactic community. The alien species found humanity's constant talking both fascinating and amusing. During yesterday's preliminary meeting, the insectoid Zephyrians had clicked their mandibles in what their translators interpreted as laughter when Lisa spent 40 minutes explaining Earth's cultural diversity to justify why humans needed different food options in the station's dining facilities. Hive voice Click-Tar had later commented through the translation network that humans seem to bond socially through excessive verbal communication, much like worker drones sharing pheromone signals. The crystalline resonance viewed human chatter with scientific curiosity rather than amusement. Prime Crystal Velnoth had attempted to study human conversation patterns by analyzing the harmonic frequencies of their voices during formal presentations. Their conclusion, shared with other council members, was that humans produced far more acoustic data than necessary for efficient information transfer. They considered it a primitive trait that would likely evolve away as humanity advanced technologically. Admiral Fluxara of the Aquatic Depth Lords had expressed the most direct opinion about human communication habits during last month's trade negotiations. Through their specialized translation apparatus, the Admiral had stated that species which talked constantly usually did so to mask their inability to think clearly. The comment had caused Lisa to spend 2 hours explaining the relationship between human verbal processing and cognitive development, which only seemed to reinforce the Admiral's point. The 12 ruling species of the Galactic Council had governed their corner of the galaxy for over 4,000 years. Their system worked because each species contributed different strengths while maintaining respectful distance from others. The avian skyborne provided advanced atmospheric flight technology, while the reptilian saurians offered expertise in adaptive biology. The gaseous whisper clouds served as neutral mediators, and the mechanical constructor race built the infrastructure that connected hundreds of worlds. Humanity had been granted provisional membership 3 years ago after demonstrating faster-than-light travel and basic diplomatic protocols. The Council's decision had been somewhat reluctant, as humans showed several concerning traits that made other species uncomfortable. Besides their excessive talking, humans displayed emotional responses that most Council races found unpredictable and often inappropriate for serious governmental discussions. Lisa remembered her first formal presentation to the full Council Assembly. She had prepared extensively, creating detailed charts and cultural documentation to help the alien delegates understand Earth's political systems and social structures. Her presentation had lasted 4 hours and covered everything from ancient Greek democracy to modern environmental protection laws. The alien delegates had listened politely, but she could sense their growing impatience as she continued explaining concepts that seemed obvious to her but apparently puzzling to them. Dr. Stephen Parker worked in his laboratory deep within the New Horizons science section, analyzing biological samples that various alien species had provided as diplomatic gifts over the past several months. The samples were supposed to represent the diversity of life throughout Council territory, allowing human scientists to better understand their new galactic neighbors. Stephen found the work fascinating, though he often wished his alien colleagues would provide more detailed documentation about the specimen's origins and collection methods. The Zephyrians had contributed several insect-like creatures that showed remarkable adaptation to different atmospheric conditions. The resonance had shared crystalline formations that appeared to store and process information in ways human technology could barely detect. The Depth Lords had provided aquatic organisms with complex neural networks that seemed to function as collective intelligence systems. What troubled Stephen was the pattern he was beginning to notice in the genetic markers of these specimens. Many showed signs of artificial modification that went far beyond natural evolution or simple selective breeding. The modifications appeared designed to enhance specific traits while suppressing others, suggesting systematic biological manipulation over extended periods. The techniques involved were far more advanced than anything human science could achieve, indicating that whoever had created these modifications possessed extremely sophisticated biotechnology. Amy Chen finished her morning report to Earth Command and began reviewing communication logs from the previous day's diplomatic meetings. Her job involved monitoring all human interactions with alien species and maintaining detailed records for future reference. The work required careful attention to both obvious communications and subtle behavioral cues that might indicate problems or opportunities. She had noticed that certain alien delegates seemed more interested in human conversation patterns than in the actual content of diplomatic discussions. Several species had requested recordings of human meetings for what they claimed were translation protocol studies. The requests seemed harmless enough, but Amy wondered why so many different alien races needed detailed analysis of human speech when their translation technology already functioned effectively. Captain Morrison reviewed his ship's security reports while discussing crew assignments with his department heads. The New Horizon served as both diplomatic embassy and military vessel, carrying enough firepower to defend itself while maintaining the peaceful appearance appropriate for diplomatic missions. The ship's design reflected humanity's cautious approach to galactic politics, preparing for potential conflicts while hoping to avoid them through careful diplomacy and cultural exchange. The human crew had adapted well to life among alien species. Though some found the constant scrutiny uncomfortable, every human action was analyzed and discussed by alien observers who seemed fascinated by behaviors that humans considered completely normal. Simple activities like sharing meals or casual conversation became subjects for detailed cultural studies. That often missed the point entirely. Stephen Parker's analysis equipment beeped softly as another test sequence completed. The results confirmed his growing suspicions about the biological samples. The genetic modifications he was detecting were not random experiments or natural adaptations. They showed clear evidence of systematic breeding programs designed to create specific traits in multiple species across different worlds. The implications were disturbing enough that he needed to discuss them with Captain Morrison immediately. He activated his communication device to contact the bridge, but instead of the usual clear connection, he heard only static. The ship's internal communication system had never malfunctioned before, and the timing seemed strangely coincidental. Stephen tried several different channels, but each produced the same empty static. Something was interfering with his ability to share his discoveries, and he suspected it was not an accident. 6 months had passed since Dr. Stephen Parker's communication system failed in his laboratory. The incident had been officially recorded as a minor technical malfunction, quickly repaired by the ship's engineering team. But Stephen knew better. His research data had been quietly copied and distributed through secure human networks to key personnel throughout human space. The information he had discovered about genetic manipulation in alien biological samples had reached the highest levels of Earth's government and military command. Ambassador Lisa Martinez stood in the preparation chamber adjacent to the main assembly hall of Harmony Point, the massive neutral station that hosted major Galactic Council meetings. Today's session would address humanity's proposed expansion of trade routes through several contested star systems. Lisa had spent weeks preparing her presentation, gathering economic data and diplomatic precedents to support humanity's position. Her staff expected her to deliver another comprehensive speech lasting several hours, as had become her trademark over the past 3 years. The assembly hall contained representatives from over 300 species, with the 12 council races occupying the primary speaking platforms. Thousands of observers filled the viewing areas, including journalists from dozens of different worlds who had come to expect entertaining quotes and cultural insights from the famously talkative human delegation. The galactic news networks had already prepared story templates about humanity's latest diplomatic efforts, ready to fill in details from Lisa's expected lengthy presentation. Communications Officer Amy Chen sat at her station aboard the New Horizon, which remained docked at Harmony Point during the council session. Her communication board showed the usual array of incoming messages from Earth, outgoing diplomatic reports, and coordination signals with other human vessels throughout the system. She had established her routine over 3 years of service, maintaining constant contact with human colonies, military units, and civilian traders across dozens of star systems. Her fingers moved automatically across the controls, managing the flow of information that kept human civilization connected across the vast distances of space. Captain Jake Morrison reviewed the morning's security briefings in his ready room, while his crew conducted their normal duties throughout the ship. The New Horizons bridge maintained its characteristic atmosphere of controlled activity, with officers discussing navigation routes, maintenance schedules, and crew assignments in the casual but professional manner that had become the standard for human military operations. The constant background chatter of human voices had become so normal that alien visitors often commented on how noisy human ships seemed compared to their own vessels. President Richard Hayes sat in his office in Washington, reviewing the classified reports that had been accumulating for months. The evidence compiled by Dr. Parker and confirmed by research teams across human space painted a disturbing picture of systematic abuse by several major alien species. The biological samples provided as diplomatic gifts had revealed genetic modifications that could only have been created through controlled breeding programs spanning thousands of years. Multiple species had been altered to enhance specific traits while suppressing others, creating living tools designed to serve the needs of their alien masters. The timing of Lisa's presentation had been carefully chosen. Intelligence reports indicated that several council species were preparing to announce new research initiatives involving primitive worlds in the Outer Rim territories. The proposals would grant the crystalline resonance and depth lords expanded access to undeveloped systems under the guise of scientific study and cultural development. Human analysis of the proposals revealed that these initiatives would provide perfect cover for expanding their illegal experimentation programs to new populations. Hive Voice Clicktar occupied the Zephyrian platform in the assembly hall, mandibles, clicking in anticipation of another amusing human performance. The insectoid delegate had grown fond of human diplomatic theater over the years, finding their emotional expressions and lengthy explanations far more entertaining than the efficient communications of other council species. The Zephyrians had begun recording human speeches for analysis by their behavioral specialists, who were studying human social bonding techniques for potential applications in hive management. Prime Crystal Velnoth resonated at frequencies indicating mild interest as they prepared to observe the human presentation. The Resonant Collective had developed sophisticated mathematical models of human communication patterns, attempting to predict the duration and content of human speeches based on preliminary diplomatic signals. Their calculations suggested that today's presentation would exceed 4 hours and cover approximately 30 subtopics related to trade route economics and interspecies cooperation principles. Admiral Fluxara had positioned their aquatic life support system near the main viewing area, planning to use human diplomatic behavior as a case study in primitive decision-making for their military academy. The Depth Lord educational system emphasized the importance of understanding inferior species through direct observation, and human council sessions provided excellent examples of inefficient communication and emotional reasoning that could be used to train young officers in dealing with mentally unstable allies. Lisa Martinez walked onto the speaking platform as the assembly hall grew quiet. Representatives from hundreds of species turned their attention toward her, expecting the familiar pattern of detailed charts, cultural explanations, and passionate appeals that had characterized human diplomatic presentations for 3 years. The translation networks activated automatically, prepared to render her words into dozens of different communication systems for the diverse audience. She approached the central podium and activated the microphone system that would carry her voice throughout the massive assembly hall and to observers on ships and stations throughout the system. The audience settled into their seats and communication platforms, preparing for another lengthy display of human verbosity. Galactic news reporters activated their recording systems, ready to capture quotes and insights for their audiences back home. Lisa looked out across the assembly hall, making eye contact with representatives from the major council species who had grown accustomed to her elaborate presentations. She opened her mouth to speak, and the entire galaxy expected to hear another passionate speech about human values and diplomatic cooperation. Instead, she said only 4 words. "We know what you have done." Then she closed her mouth and said nothing more. The silence that followed was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever experienced. For 3 years, every human diplomatic event had been filled with endless talking, detailed explanations, and emotional appeals. The sudden absence of human voices created an acoustic vacuum that seemed to press against the walls of the assembly hall. Amy Chen sat at her communication station aboard the New Horizon with her hands folded in her lap. Her communication boards continued to receive incoming messages, but she made no moves to respond to any of them. The constant stream of reports and coordination signals that had characterized human space operations for 3 years simply stopped. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge without speaking. When his navigation officer attempted to discuss the day's flight plans, Morrison simply looked at him and said nothing. The bridge crew gradually realized that their captain was not going to respond to any questions or comments. The characteristic chatter of human military operations faded into uncomfortable silence. President Hayes entered the White House press room where dozens of reporters waited for his scheduled announcement about new diplomatic initiatives. He walked to the podium and stood there for 30 minutes without saying a single word. Then he turned and left the room, ignoring the shouted questions that followed him down the corridor. Across human space, every embassy, military base, trading post, and civilian colony fell silent at exactly the same moment. 3 weeks of human silence had transformed the galaxy in ways no one could have predicted. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades began experiencing mysterious delays and coordination failures. Mixed species colonies, where humans provided essential technical services, suddenly found their power grids malfunctioning and their communication networks developing strange interference patterns. The problems were never catastrophic enough to cause real harm, but they created a growing sense of unease among alien populations who had grown dependent on human efficiency and reliability. Prime Chancellor Mordak of the Skyborn race called for an emergency council session after receiving reports from 17 different star systems about unexplained disruptions in human-managed operations. The avian leader's feathers displayed the deep purple patterns that indicated serious concern as he reviewed intelligence reports from across council territory. Human ships continued to operate throughout the galaxy, but they no longer responded to routine communications from alien vessels or space traffic control systems. The emergency session convened in the same assembly hall where Ambassador Lisa Martinez had spoken her last words 3 weeks earlier. The 12 council races gathered with an urgency that had not been seen in centuries of peaceful governance. Their usual confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious nervousness as they struggled to understand what humanity was planning. The human delegation attended the session as always, but they sat in complete silence, offering no explanations or responses to direct questions. High Voice Clicktar attempted to open dialogue by addressing the human delegation directly through the translation network. The Zephyrian leaders' mandibles clicked in patterns that their own species recognized as formal diplomatic courtesy, but the humans simply stared ahead without acknowledgement. The insectoid delegate had never encountered a situation where one species completely refused to engage in any form of communication, and their behavioral specialists had no precedent for interpreting such absolute silence. Intelligence reports began flooding into Council headquarters from military units stationed throughout the galaxy. Human ship movements had taken on patterns that made no sense to alien strategic analysts. Captain Katie Brooks commanded a human vessel called the Silent Storm that had positioned itself at a crucial hyperspace junction point connecting three major trade routes. When confronted by a Zephyrian patrol fleet demanding an explanation for her presence, she maintained position without offering any response to their communications. The Silent Storm was not alone in its mysterious positioning. Human ships had quietly moved to strategic locations throughout Council space, taking positions that would allow them to control or disrupt major transportation and communication networks. The movements were coordinated with military precision, but no alien intelligence service could determine the purpose behind the positioning or predict what action might follow. Dr. Elena Martinez worked in her laboratory aboard the research vessel, Dark Matter, continuing experiments that her alien colleagues could no longer understand or predict. Her research partner, a gaseous being named Wisp Cloud, had attempted repeatedly to discuss their joint project on dark energy manipulation, but Elena simply continued her work without acknowledging any questions or suggestions. The alien scientist found the situation deeply disturbing, as their species depended on constant information sharing to maintain their collective consciousness. The quantum physics experiments that Elena conducted had taken on new characteristics since the silence began. Her equipment generated energy patterns that interfered with alien scanning systems and created dead zones where their monitoring technology could not function properly. When Wisp Cloud attempted to analyze the interference patterns, they discovered that human technology had somehow evolved beyond their ability to comprehend or counter. Admiral Fluxara of the Depth Lords decided to test human resolve by surrounding several human colonies with battle fleets. The aquatic commander expected the show of force to break human silence and restore normal diplomatic communications. Instead, the human defenders took defensive positions without offering any explanation or negotiation. General Chris Thompson commanded the Colonial Defense Forces, and he deployed his troops with tactical efficiency that surprised the alien military observers. The standoff between Depth Lord fleets and human colonies created a dangerous situation that could escalate into open warfare. But the humans refused to be provoked into hostile action, and they also refused to engage in the diplomatic discussions that might diffuse the tension. They simply maintained their defensive positions and waited, creating a psychological pressure that the alien commanders found increasingly difficult to handle. Meanwhile, Dr. Stephen Parker's research had been distributed to key personnel throughout human space through secure networks that alien intelligence services could not access or decode. The truth about Council species conducting illegal biological experiments on primitive races had spread among human leadership, creating a unified understanding of the threat that their new galactic neighbors represented. The evidence was clear that several major alien races viewed less advanced species as laboratory subjects rather than equals worthy of protection. Commander Sarah Williams operated the deep space reconnaissance ship Voidwalker in sectors that were supposedly uninhabited, according to official Council charts. Her mission involved documenting the hidden research facilities that Council species had established on worlds they claimed were empty of intelligent life. The facilities were operated jointly by crystalline resonance and depth lords, using advanced biotechnology to conduct experiments on captured members of primitive species. The research stations that Sarah discovered contained thousands of imprisoned beings from dozens of different worlds. The facilities were designed to study the effects of genetic modification on different species, testing the limits of biological adaptation under controlled conditions. The experiments had been conducted for centuries, creating a vast database of biological information that the council races used to develop new forms of biotechnology and biological weapons. The evidence that Sarah collected was transmitted through encrypted human communication networks to military and civilian leaders throughout human space. The documentation was comprehensive and undeniable, showing not only the existence of the illegal research programs, but also the systematic nature of the operations and the involvement of multiple council species in coordinated atrocities. Prime. Crystal Velnoth attempted to use their telepathic abilities to penetrate human consciousness and determine what humanity was planning. The Resonant Collective had never encountered minds that could completely resist their mental probes, but human consciousness had somehow developed barriers that blocked all attempts at telepathic contact. The crystal beings found themselves facing an intelligence they could not read or predict, a situation they had never experienced in thousands of years of galactic interaction. The galactic news networks struggled to report on the human silence, because they had no information to share with their audiences. For 3 years, human interviews and cultural exchanges had provided constant content for news programs throughout council space. The sudden absence of human voices left a void in galactic media that could not be filled by speculation or analysis from alien experts who had never really understood humanity in the first place. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Davis had begun implementing something called Protocol 7 among human military units throughout the galaxy. The protocol involved complete communication independence from all alien networks and systems, creating a parallel command structure that operated without any external oversight or monitoring. When Scale Commander Thesic of the Saurian forces attempted to inquire about unusual human troop movements, Davis simply walked away without offering any explanation. The alien species that had once found human chatter amusing now desperately wished for any form of communication from their former partners. But humanity had learned something important during their 3 years of talking to the Galactic Council. They had discovered that their words were being ignored while their actions were being carefully studied for weaknesses and opportunities for exploitation. 2 months after the last human word was spoken in council chambers, the galaxy learned why humanity had stopped talking. Without any warning or explanation, human forces struck simultaneously across 12 different star systems. But these were not random attacks or acts of aggression against innocent targets. Each strike hit a hidden research facility where alien species had been conducting illegal experiments on primitive races for centuries. Captain Jake Morrison led the assault on the primary resonant research station hidden in the Kepler system. The New Horizon approached the facility with 3 other human ships, moving in perfect coordination without transmitting a single communication signal. Their tactical systems operated through hand signals and pre-programmed sequences that alien monitoring equipment could not intercept or decode. The research station's defenders had no warning until human boarding parties were already cutting through their hull plating. The facility contained over 2,000 imprisoned beings from 47 different species. The crystalline resonance had been using these captives to study the effects of consciousness transfer between different biological systems. The experiments involved forcing alien minds into artificial crystal matrices to determine how much mental capacity could be extracted and stored for later use. Many of the test subjects had been driven insane by the process, while others had died when their consciousness could not adapt to the crystal storage systems. Morrison's crew worked with deadly efficiency to disable the facility's defenses and free the imprisoned beings. They communicated only through tactical hand signals that had been developed specifically for operations requiring complete communication silence. The rescue operation proceeded with mechanical precision, as if every human involved had memorized their exact role and timing through extensive practice. Not a single word was spoken during the entire assault. General Chris Thompson's forces surrounded the secret Depth Lord laboratory network in the Vega sector at exactly the same time. The aquatic aliens had established their research stations on ocean worlds where they could conduct experiments in their natural environment while remaining hidden from galactic oversight. Their facilities focused on biological weapon development, using captured specimens to test new forms of engineered diseases and toxins. The Depth Lords had assumed their bioweapons would provide adequate defense against any attack, but human forces deployed countermeasures that neutralized every toxic compound and biological agent the aquatic aliens attempted to use. Dr. Stephen Parker's research had provided detailed information about Depth Lord biotechnology, allowing human scientists to develop specific antidotes and protective systems months before the actual assault began. Thompson's troops moved through the underwater facilities wearing specialized equipment that protected them from biological attacks while allowing them to operate effectively in aquatic environments. The Depth Lords found themselves completely outmaneuvered by opponents who had prepared for every defensive measure they could deploy. The aliens were accustomed to fighting races they considered intellectually inferior, but humanity had proven capable of countering their most advanced biological weapons. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Davis revealed the true purpose of Protocol 7 during the coordinated strikes across 12 star systems. The protocol had created a complete human military communication system that operated independently of all galactic networks and technologies. While alien species had spent years learning to interpret human chatter for intelligence purposes, humanity had built an entirely separate command structure that required no verbal communication whatsoever. The protocol used a combination of prearranged signals, technological interfaces, and tactical coordination that allowed human forces to operate as a unified military organization without transmitting any detectable communications. Davis had spent months training human military personnel in the new system, preparing them for operations that would require absolute communication security against technologically advanced opponents. Dr. Elena Martinez activated her quantum resonance device from aboard the dark matter research vessel, simultaneously broadcasting evidence of alien atrocities to every inhabited world in the galaxy. The transmission penetrated all known communication barriers and defensive systems, ensuring that no species could block or filter the information. The evidence included detailed documentation of the research facilities, recordings of the experiments being conducted, and testimony from rescued victims who had survived the alien testing programs. The quantum broadcast reached primitive worlds that had never been allowed to communicate freely with the galactic community, as well as advanced civilizations that had been unaware of the Council's secret activities. The proof was undeniable and comprehensive, showing not only the existence of the illegal research programs, but also the systematic nature of the operations and the involvement of multiple Council species in coordinated atrocities against less advanced races. Captain Katie Brooks commanded the Silent Storm as it disabled hyperspace network nodes that the Council had been using to monitor and control the movement of primitive species throughout the galaxy. The nodes had been disguised as navigation aids and communication relays, but their real purpose was to track and intercept any attempts by less advanced races to contact each other or organize resistance against Council policies. Brooks and her crew used specialized equipment to surgically disable the monitoring functions while leaving the navigation systems operational. The work required precise technical knowledge and careful timing to avoid detection until the entire network was compromised simultaneously. For the first time in galactic history, primitive worlds could communicate freely with each other without Council oversight or interference. Commander Sarah Williams led strike teams that rescued experimentation victims and transported them to safe worlds where they could receive medical treatment and psychological support. Many of the rescued beings had never seen their home planets since being captured years or decades earlier. They learned that humanity had discovered their plight and chosen direct action over the endless diplomatic debates that had allowed the atrocities to continue for centuries. The rescued victims represented dozens of species that had been classified as primitive or unworthy of council protection. Many had been taken from their worlds as children and had grown up in the research facilities, knowing no other life than serving as test subjects for alien experiments. The psychological damage was extensive, but human medical teams had prepared treatment programs based on Dr. Parker's analysis of the biological modifications that many victims had endured. The galactic community erupted in chaos as hundreds of primitive species learned about the Council's secret activities and demanded answers from their supposed protectors. The 12 ruling races found themselves facing a united coalition of beings they had dismissed as unworthy of consideration. The evidence provided by human forces made it impossible for Council members to deny their involvement or claim ignorance. About the research programs, Prime Crystal Velnoth attempted to justify the resonant experiments by claiming they had been conducted for the benefit of galactic science and the advancement of all species. But the rescued victims testified about the torture and suffering they had endured, making it clear that the research had been conducted without consent and with complete disregard for the welfare of the test subjects. Admiral Fluxara tried to defend the Depth Lord biological weapon research by arguing that it was necessary for galactic security against potential threats from unknown hostile species. However, the evidence showed that the weapons had been tested on captured civilians from peaceful worlds, including children and elderly beings who posed no possible military threat to anyone. Throughout all of these coordinated military operations and information releases, humanity maintained absolute silence. They had become the galaxy's immune system, surgically removing threats and exposing corruption without offering explanations or justifications for their actions. The species that once could not stop talking had learned that actions speak far louder than words ever could. 6 months after the last human word was spoken in council chambers, the galaxy had fundamentally changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Galactic Council's authority had collapsed as hundreds of previously unknown or ignored species demanded representation in galactic government. The 12 ruling races found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered by a coalition of beings they had never bothered to truly acknowledge as equals worthy of respect or consideration. Humanity remained silent, but their actions continued to reshape galactic civilization in profound ways. Ambassador Lisa Martinez still attended council sessions when they were held, but she never spoke a single word during any of the proceedings. Instead, she presented detailed holographic evidence of ongoing atrocities and corruption, letting the documented facts speak for themselves without commentary or explanation. Her presentations, delivered without any verbal accompaniment, proved more powerful and convincing than any speech she had ever given during her 3 years of constant talking. The alien species that had once found human chatter amusing now desperately wished for any form of communication from their former partners. Hive Voice Click-Tar had attempted repeatedly to apologize for the Zephyrians' role in the illegal experimentation programs, but Captain Jake Morrison simply acknowledged the gesture, with a brief nod, and continued with his duties. The insectoid delegate found the lack of verbal response more unsettling than any angry words could have been. Prime Crystal Velnoth's harmonic frequencies grew increasingly desperate as they realized their telepathic probes could not penetrate the wall of human silence. The Resonant Collective had always relied on their ability to read the thoughts and intentions of other species, but human consciousness had somehow developed barriers that made mental contact impossible. The crystal beings found themselves dealing with an intelligence they could not understand or predict, a situation they had never encountered in thousands of years of galactic interaction. President Richard Hayes finally broke humanity's silence. During a special broadcast that was transmitted simultaneously to every inhabited world in the galaxy. The transmission reached primitive planets that had never been contacted by galactic civilization, as well as advanced worlds that served as centers of interstellar commerce and culture. His message was brief and direct, lasting only 30 seconds from beginning to end. "We spoke for 3 years," Hayes said, looking directly into the camera with an expression of calm determination. "You did not listen to our words. Now you will learn to hear without words." Then he stepped away from the podium, and humanity returned to silence as complete as it had been for the previous 6 months. The practical results of humanity's actions became increasingly clear as the new galactic order took shape. Dr. Stephen Parker's biological research had led to medical advances that benefited all species throughout the galaxy, but humans shared this knowledge freely without seeking credit, payment, or political advantage. The treatments they developed were distributed to any world that needed them, regardless of the recipient's technological level or political affiliation with human interests. Captain Katie Brooks and her fleet maintained order at the crucial hyperspace, junctions that connected major trade routes throughout the galaxy. Her ships ensured free passage for all beings regardless of their species, technological capabilities, or political status. The Silent Storm and its companion vessels had become a neutral peacekeeping force that operated without mandate or oversight from any government, appearing wherever primitive species needed protection from exploitation or abuse. General Chris Thompson's forces had evolved into a galactic peacekeeping organization that responded to threats against vulnerable populations throughout Council, space, and beyond. They appeared without warning wherever primitive species were being threatened, resolved the situation with efficient precision, and disappeared again without demanding gratitude, payment, or political concessions from those they had helped. Their operations were funded entirely by human resources and conducted according to human ethical standards. The former Council races struggled to adapt to a galaxy where they no longer held automatic authority over less advanced species. Some alien civilizations, particularly the avian skyborn, attempted to make amends for their past behavior by reforming their policies toward primitive worlds and offering genuine assistance rather than exploitation. These species found that their efforts to change were acknowledged by humanity through continued cooperation and trade relationships. Other alien races, especially the Depth Lords, retreated to their home systems and refused to acknowledge the new galactic order. Admiral Fluxera had declared that the aquatic aliens would no longer participate in any form of interstellar cooperation, preferring isolation to accepting reduced status in the galactic community. Their withdrawal from galactic affairs was met with indifference by humanity and relief by many primitive species who had suffered under Depth Lord exploitation. New alliances formed between species that had never been allowed to interact freely under the old Council system. The beings who had been rescued from alien research facilities established their own networks of communication and mutual aid, inspired by humanity's example of taking action to help others without expecting anything in return. These new coalitions operated according to principles of equality and mutual respect that had been impossible under Council rule. Dr. Elena Martinez completed her quantum research and developed technology that ensured no species could ever again secretly monitor or control another civilization without their knowledge and consent. This technology was distributed freely to all species throughout the galaxy, establishing a new foundation of privacy and autonomy that made future exploitation much more difficult. The quantum barrier she created could not be bypassed by any known alien technology. New forms of interstellar government began emerging as primitive species gained the ability to communicate freely with each other and organize their own political systems. These governments operated according to principles of voluntary cooperation rather than the hierarchical dominance that had characterized Council rule. Humanity provided technical assistance and protection when requested, but never attempted to control or direct the political development of other species. The galaxy learned to communicate in ways that did not require constant talking or diplomatic posturing. Actions, demonstrated commitment, and consistent ethical behavior became more important than elaborate speeches or formal treaties. Species began judging each other by what they did rather than what they said, creating a more honest and effective form of interstellar relations. Trade relationships developed between species that had never been allowed to interact under council oversight. Primitive worlds gained access to advanced technology and medical knowledge, while more developed species benefited from unique resources and cultural perspectives that had been hidden from them by council policies. The economic benefits of free interaction proved far greater than the controlled systems that had existed under alien rule. As the story reached its conclusion, humanity maintained its silence while continuing to serve as the galaxy's conscience and protector. The final scene showed Ambassador Lisa Martinez alone in the empty council chambers, which had been converted into a museum dedicated to the victims of alien experimentation. She placed a single flower on the podium where she had once given lengthy speeches about peace and cooperation. The flower was a gift from one of the rescued species, a simple gesture that conveyed more meaning than any words could express. The gesture represented everything that humanity had learned about communication and leadership. They had discovered that true influence came not from talking about principles, but from living according to them. In their silence, they had taught an entire galaxy how to truly hear the voices of those who had been ignored and oppressed for thousands of years. Humanity stopped talking when they realized the galaxy was not listening to their words. In their silence, they had created a universe where actions mattered more than promises, where protection was provided without exploitation, and where every species could find their own voice without fear of being silenced by those who claimed to know better.